Today on Psycast, we're reflecting on the dilemma of the man who never grew up. This episode is presented in podcast format, with subtitles to help you follow along with calm and clarity. Let me ask you something that might sound simple, but it carries a quiet weight. Have you ever looked at someone, perhaps even yourself, and wondered why, despite age, experience, and the outer mask of adulthood, there's still a part that feels stuck in the past? Not nostalgic, not sentimental, but unfinished, as if time moved forward, but something inside never caught up. There's a strange kind of ache that lives in this experience. A man who pays his bills, goes to work, maybe even has a family, but behind his eyes, you can see it. The hesitation, the fear of conflict, the quiet craving for someone to still take care of him. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it hides behind confidence, sarcasm, or a smile that arrives a second too late. But it's there. A boy, sitting quietly inside a man's body, waiting for someone to notice he's still afraid. This isn't a rare thing. It's not a flaw, either. It's a dilemma, one that touches more people than we realize. We often assume adulthood comes naturally, like a biological clock that just ticks us into maturity. But emotional growth is not automatic. You can grow older without growing inward. And when that inner growth is interrupted, ignored, or neglected, what remains is a fractured self. A person who looks complete on the outside, but is still carrying a child's fears, dreams, wounds, and longings. This is what Jung pointed to in the archetype he called the puer aeternus, the eternal boy. Not as a criticism, but as a warning. Jung understood that within all of us lies this childlike energy. It's playful, imaginative, full of potential. But when it's left alone, when it doesn't evolve, it can become a trap, a prison of avoidance disguised as freedom. Jung believed that the puer aeternus archetype shows up most clearly when someone refuses to commit, whether to a career, a relationship, or a responsibility. There's often a fear of limitation, of being tied down, of losing one's sense of endless possibility. But behind that fear lies something deeper. The belief that real life is supposed to feel easy, exciting, and always open. The eternal boy doesn't want to choose because choosing means closing doors. And closing doors feels like dying to him. So he floats between jobs, between people, between versions of himself. And yet, despite all this floating, he often feels stuck. There's a loneliness to it, a sense that something essential is missing. And no matter how far he runs from it, it always catches up to him. In silence, in shame, in the quiet moments when no one is watching. You might be thinking of someone you know, or maybe, just maybe, you're realizing you've been there too. That somewhere along the way, you kept parts of yourself hidden in a time that no longer exists. That you've carried the weight of unspoken fears and unmet needs for years, maybe decades. And if that's the case, let me tell you this. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're simply at a threshold. And thresholds are sacred places. Not because they're easy, but because they ask something honest of us. They ask us to look at what we've outgrown. They ask us to take responsibility for our lives. Not as punishment, but as liberation. Because real adulthood isn't about losing the child within you. It's about integrating him, giving him the safety he never had, the voice he never used, the dignity he was too afraid to claim. Let me tell you something that stayed with me from Jung's work. He said that the shadow, the part of us we refuse to look at, doesn't just disappear because we age. It actually grows stronger the longer we ignore it. For many men, that shadow is filled with the pieces of a boy who never felt safe to grow up. And the danger isn't in being childlike. The danger is in being ruled by the fears and needs of a child, without the awareness of an adult. You can see it in how some men handle rejection, how they fear failure, how they explode when criticized, or shut down when intimacy requires vulnerability. These aren't simply bad habits or personality quirks. They are survival strategies that began long ago, when expressing sadness wasn't allowed, when needing love was seen as weak, when being sensitive was punished instead of nurtured. So that boy learned to armor up, to hide behind performance, strength, or silence. And that armor, over time, became so familiar that he forgot it was ever something he put on. There's a painful paradox here. The very behaviors meant to protect the boy often isolate the man. The bravado, the emotional distance, the refusal to depend on anyone, they all come from fear, not strength. And when life eventually demands depth, whether through love, grief, failure, or fatherhood, that man finds himself unequipped. Because growth was postponed, responsibility was feared. And somewhere along the way, the idea of becoming a man became entangled with pressure, punishment, or loss of freedom. Jung saw this happening on a collective level. He noticed that when a culture loses its rites of passage, when elders don't guide the young toward meaning, when masculinity becomes either hollow dominance or passive withdrawal, we end up with generations of men who feel lost. Not because they're weak, but because they were never shown how to become strong in a way that includes their vulnerability. Robert Bly wrote that men need to descend before they can rise, that there is a necessary journey inward, into the forgotten grief, into the unclaimed emotions, into the wounds that were never named. He called this the descent to the ashes, a place where the false self begins to fall apart, and what is real, what is essential, starts to emerge. But here's the thing. No one can make that journey for you, and no one can force you into it. It's something you have to choose. And for many men, that choice begins not with a dramatic moment, but with a quiet realization. I am tired of performing. I am tired of pretending I'm okay. I am ready to meet myself for real. That moment, though simple, is sacred, because it's the beginning of a return not to childhood, but to wholeness, to a version of yourself that is no longer split between the past and the present. I once heard someone say, "You don't become a man by turning a certain age. You become a man by turning toward your pain." And I believe that, because until we face what hurt us, we keep looking for someone else to fix it. A partner, a mentor, even a child of our own. But healing isn't about being rescued. It's about reclaiming the parts of ourselves we once abandoned. That means being honest about what we missed, about the love we didn't receive, about the protection we never had, and then learning, slowly, gently, how to give those things to ourselves. Not perfectly, not all at once, but piece by piece, choice by choice. Would you like me to continue? Maybe no one told you this before, but healing doesn't look like becoming someone new. It looks like remembering who you were before you had to forget yourself to survive. And for many men, that forgetting began early, when emotions were called weakness, when softness was mocked, when asking for help brought shame instead of comfort. So they adapted. They became what they thought they needed to be to earn approval, safety, or love. Maybe they became overachievers, or rebels, or caretakers, or silent observers. But underneath all of it was a silent, aching question. Am I enough just as I am? And because that question was never answered with warmth, they carried it into adulthood like a ghost, haunting their relationships, their ambitions, even their self-worth. Carl Jung knew that the unresolved boy doesn't disappear. He becomes the man who can't rest, can't trust, can't feel safe in his own skin. And so the work of healing is not about becoming hard or numb or stoic. It's about becoming whole. Sometimes that wholeness begins in the most unexpected places. In the moment a man admits, "I don't know how to talk about what I feel." In the silence after a breakdown, where everything feels lost, but something deeper begins to stir. In the quiet courage of showing up for therapy, or opening up to a friend, or holding his own child with gentleness he never received. These are not signs of weakness. These are signs of transformation. Because when a man touches his pain without running from it, something shifts. He begins to see that strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about learning how to be with himself when he does. The boy inside him doesn't need to be erased. He needs to be listened to, understood, held with the kind of compassion he never knew was possible. And that's the heart of this dilemma. The boy doesn't disappear because he's immature. He stays because he was never given the tools to grow. The man, then, is not failing. He's waiting for permission to stop performing, waiting for space to grieve what was lost, waiting for someone to say, it's okay to not have it all together. But that someone has to be him. No one can do that work from the outside, because the real journey of becoming a man is not about proving your worth to the world. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that already were worthy, but got left behind. That means facing the fear of disappointment, of conflict, of being seen as less than. It means choosing depth over comfort, truth over image, and love over control. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's worth it. Because when that man begins to walk through life, no longer trying to hide the boy, but rather honoring his story, something beautiful happens. He becomes the father he never had, the partner he always needed, the friend he was searching for. He becomes not a perfect man, but a whole one who doesn't need to dominate to feel powerful, doesn't need to run to feel free, doesn't need to silence others to feel secure. He becomes a man who knows how to listen, how to love, how to stay. Not because he's never afraid, but because he finally knows who he is and no longer needs to run from that. So what does it mean then to truly grow up? Not just in age, but in soul. It means refusing to let your inner world be hijacked by unfinished stories. It means learning to stand in discomfort without reaching for distraction. It means acknowledging the boy inside you without letting him drive the whole vehicle of your life. Because if we're honest, there's a part of many men that still longs to be rescued, to be mothered, praised, excused, forgiven without being asked to change. But growth demands something else. It asks us to become the adult we were waiting for, not to pretend everything's fine, but to hold space for everything that isn't, and to respond with maturity instead of avoidance. That means setting boundaries where we used to seek approval, owning mistakes instead of hiding behind blame, choosing presence over escape. These are not grand gestures. They're quiet, repeated acts of self-respect. And over time, they change the shape of your life. There's a story I often return to. It's not from a book, but from a man I once met. He was in his late 50s when he told me this, almost in a whisper. I spent my whole life chasing success because I thought it would finally make my father proud. But I never stopped to ask if I was proud of me. His voice cracked. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even sad. He was simply tired of running, tired of trying to earn what no one could give him but himself. That moment marked the beginning of his turning point. He started making decisions that weren't about proving anything. He began writing letters he would never send, forgiving people who would never apologize, and talking to the boy he used to be, not with blame, but with gentleness. He said that, for the first time in decades, he didn't feel like an imposter in his own skin. That's what healing can look like. Not a dramatic transformation, but a slow, quiet return to authenticity. And maybe that's the real secret. Healing doesn't always look powerful. Sometimes it looks like a man learning how to cry without shame. Sometimes it's him saying no to things that once made him feel important, but left him empty. Sometimes it's him learning how to sit with anger without turning it outward, or with sadness without collapsing into it. These are deeply human skills, ones that many were never taught. Because in many cultures, boys are raised to perform, to protect, to push through. But rarely are they taught how to reflect, how to receive, how to feel. And so we have a world full of men who are successful but emotionally starving, who can fix a broken pipe but not a broken heart, who can lift weights but not the weight of their own story. And that's not a moral failure. It's a cultural wound, one that can be healed, not by shame, but by courage. And here's where the courage begins. Not in trying to be better, but in choosing to be more real. In choosing, again and again, to show up for yourself in the places where you were once abandoned. To no longer outsource your worth to other people's approval. To take yourself seriously enough to ask, what kind of man do I want to be when no one is watching? Because that man, the one who lives in integrity when it's inconvenient, who speaks with kindness when it costs him, who holds himself accountable without becoming his own enemy, that man doesn't just arrive, he's built, day by day, choice by choice, mistake by mistake. And every time he shows up, the boy inside him breathes a little easier. Not because the pain is gone, but because he's no longer facing it alone. And maybe that's what growing up really is. Not erasing the boy, not burying him, but finally meeting him with the eyes of someone who has lived. Someone who understands what he went through, who can say, "You don't have to keep guarding me. I'm here now. I've got us." Because the man who never grew up isn't broken. He's unfinished. He stopped at a chapter that no one helped him write. And now, with awareness and intention, he has the chance to continue that story differently. This is where the dilemma transforms into possibility. When the fear of becoming a man softens into the courage of becoming yourself. Not the version others demanded, not the mask you wore to survive, but the whole, complex, beautiful self you were always meant to become. There's a quiet strength in that kind of maturity. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need to dominate or perform. It shows up in the small things, in the way you listen without interrupting, in the way you forgive without forgetting who you are, in the way you love without needing to be owed anything in return. That's not the boy seeking approval. That's the man offering presence. And presence, real presence, is the rarest gift we can give, both to others and to ourselves, especially in a world that often tells us to be louder, tougher, more impressive. But there's a different kind of power in being able to sit still with your truth, to admit what hurts, to celebrate what heals, to walk away from what no longer fits. And most of all, to know that your worth isn't something you earn by pretending to be okay. It's something you uncover by being honest about what isn't. So, to the man who still feels like a boy inside, you're not behind. You're not broken. You're just ready. Ready to stop running. Ready to stop hiding. Ready to meet the world with both the softness of the child you were and the strength of the man you're becoming. And no, it won't be perfect. You'll have days when the old patterns pull you back, when fear whispers in your ear that it's safer not to try. But you'll also have days when you surprise yourself, when you speak up, when you stay present, when you choose connection over avoidance. And those days, they build something that no one can take from you, a life that feels like yours, not because it's easy, but because it's true. So let me leave you with this. You don't have to become someone else to be worthy of respect. You just have to become fully yourself. The man who can hold the boy's story without being ruled by it. The man who can honor his pain without making it his identity. The man who, quietly and consistently, chooses to grow, not out of shame, but out of love. That kind of man, he changes the world, one honest step at a time.